and present. To him, we present this film in honor of Mr. McDoniel. In 1940, graduated from the University of Arkansas with a Bachelor of Science degree in education. While at Arkansas, Mr. McDoniel participated in Arkansas's athletic program, lettering in football and track. His last 2 years with the Razorbacks were exceptionally outstanding. Here are a few quotes from the 19 yearbook. After the rout by the Aggies, the Razorbacks embarked once more into enemy territory to engage the Rice Owls. Here were two teams that should have been champions, two teams that everyone thought were the teams to watch, two teams that should have had a successful season but did not. They met down Houston way, and when untangled they were practically at the same place they started. Rice Institute, playing without their star Latin, fought back the Arkansas team to gain a 12-12 tie. 5 times Thorson's Pigskinners threatened, but only twice were they able to score. McDoniel plowed over for the first touchdown after the stage had been set by a 36-yarder from Eakin to Britt. Cole plunged over for the second marker. The spread formation used by Arkansas baffled the Owls throughout the battle. After 2 weeks' rest and much praise for the victory over SMU, the Arkansas Razorbacks brought their 10-game schedule to a fitting close by trouncing the University of Tulsa Golden Hurricanes 23-0 in their annual Thanksgiving Day Classic. Led by the shifty-footed and limber-armed Eakin, the Porkers scored in every quarter except the third and found that difficulty in disposing of their Turkey Day rivals. Eakin scored the first touchdown pass to Hickey for second, set up the last with another flip to Hickey, and did all the putting average, 43 yards on a soggy field. McDoniel crashed over for the final marker. Later in the final period, Symington booted a field goal. He also towed the extra points after the touchdowns. Here, Mr. McDoniel might remember some of these men who participated with you in track at the University of Arkansas. Here's a picture of Mr. McDoniel in a track meet. This particular meet, he took a first place for his leaps. Here we find Mr. McDoniel in the University of Arkansas Letterman's Club for his fine efforts and contributions for football and track. In this picture, we find Mr. McDoniel in one of his first coaching positions, here with Harrison High School's basketball team in Harrison, Arkansas. Mr. McDoniel led Harrison High to its third consecutive Northwest Arkansas Conference Championship. And here is a group picture of Harrison's football team. Can you find our celebrity? And here is Mr. McDoniel with Basic High's football team. Here we find Mr. McDoniel smiling for once. Funny, isn't it? It was payday.
Talking with Lieutenant Governor Harry
Here
Reid.
are a few of your friends from the past who'd like to express their appreciation.
We're talking with Lieutenant Governor Harry Reid, a former student at Basic High School. Lieutenant Governor, may I first ask you, how long have you known our principal, Mr. McDoniel?
First knew of Mr. McDoniel. I lived in Henderson during the war. My brothers played ball for Coach McDoniel. I still refer to him as Coach McDoniel. He was the coach, and at that time coached my brothers Don and Dale.
All right. What years were you a student at Basic?
I moved over from Searchlight in 1953, graduated in 1957.
You graduated at Basic then.
Yeah, I graduated in 57. I'm a student body president that year.
How large of a school was Basic when you were there? Approximately the number of students and teachers?
I don't know. It seemed big at the time, but it certainly wasn't as large as Rancho in Vegas. I don't know, 500-600 kids, I guess.
Have you been to our new school lately?
Yeah, I've been to the school. I haven't had a real tour of the school. I haven't seen the pool and things of that nature. I started high school at the, now I guess it's a museum or something. I don't know what they've done, but I started school there. We moved at Christmas time up to the old basic high school, which is now, I guess, a junior high. So I've really seen 3 high schools for basic.
What were Mr. McDoniels' jobs when you were attending basic as a student?
When I was going to high school at basic, I think for a while he was athletic director and vice principal. The jobs may have changed, but I think he held both of those jobs while I was there. I think first he was athletic director and then he became vice principal.
What kind of person did he strike you as being?
Well, I think the interesting thing about Coach McDoniel, Mayor McDoniel, whatever his appropriate title is now, is that he was very firm, but he treated everyone the same. I think education needs more people like him. We have too little firmness in education. He was a man who believed in having rules, but there was no need to have rules unless they were enforced, and he did his best to enforce the rules in a fair manner.
Well, that answers my next question too on fairness. To what extent, professionally and personally, do you know him now?
Well, naturally, I have been city attorney out in Henderson after I got out of law school. I worked with him there. He was a man that was interested in what was going on in the city council. After that, after I had gone to other things, other elective jobs, he became mayor of the city of Henderson. And so in that capacity, I worked with him on legislation that was important to the city of Henderson, and in general governmental capacity, his being mayor, my being either an assemblyman or lieutenant governor. I have known him. He's helped me in campaigns that I've run. He's just been a friend. That's the only way I can say it.
Do you keep in touch to this day?
Sure. His family, his boy, and I are very close. Anytime that I need something in Henderson, he's one of the first men that I go to.
Okay, that about wraps up my questions. I'd like to give you a few minutes now if you'd like to say anything, anything else that I haven't asked you about him, personally or professionally.
Well, I think that the thing that probably I haven't said is that during a person's education, I went to school about 20 years of my life, there aren't many people that you meet as teachers, instructors, that you really remember. I can give you the names of many people that taught me. And there are those names that you can remember, a lot of them you remember in a negative sense. But I really think that Coach McDoniel, to me and my family, brothers, my mother, and my wife, he's a man that we all know, we all remember, and he, I think, has done a great deal to me and meant a great deal to me in my life to bring about whatever success I've had in life. I think that I owe at least a part of it to him in the way that he believed in having rules and enforcing those rules. I think this has really spilled over in all walks of my life.
Okay, thank you very much. That about wraps it up. Thank you for doing this interview with us.
Glad to have the opportunity to tell you how I feel about Coach McDoniel.
Thank you. We're talking with Governor Michael Callahan about our former principal, Mr. McDoniel. Governor, what years were you at Basic?
Oh, I taught at Basic 1956 through 1961 when Mac was the vice principal.
What was your job?
Well, I was a teacher. I taught government, history, and economics, and 1 year I was a counselor.
What was Mr. McDoniel's job when you were teaching at Basic?
Well, Mac was vice principal. He was a disciplinarian. He was a fellow that kept the staff together. Probably the biggest thing about McDoniel that I remember when I first met him in 1956 was the fact that he was the kind of guy that could tell you where you're wrong and how you could straighten things out, and then you wouldn't hear about it anymore. I mean, it was just a one-time thing. If he became angry with you, he didn't stay angry. Another probably outstanding thing about Big Mac, the fact that there's no doubt in any member of the faculty or the students that he was all man. He was a real man. He was, well, you might say that Mac is a man's man.
Did you have any contact in your political lives while Mr. McDoniel was mayor of Henderson?
Yes, we had some contact when he was mayor of Henderson, and it was the same way when he was mayor. His word was his bond, and you didn't have to worry about a handshake or a written letter or a written contract with Estes McDoniel. His word was his bond, and that's all you needed.
Is there any specific qualities that that interest you in Mr. McDoniel? I mean, what kind of person does he strike you as being?
Well, he's the kind of guy that I like to be around because you can have fun with him. He's a good outdoorsman. He's a good fisherman. Matter of fact, the first time I ever went fishing at Lake Mead was with Mac and a fellow by the name of Ed Schellinger that used to teach school out there, Bob Lunt, who was still with the school district, and we stayed out overnight, and it was a great night. We really had a good time. And as an outdoorsman, as a fine athlete in his own right, he understood the problems of the students, and it comes right down to here we have a man that was willing to serve young people, willing to serve the community, and his whole life has been service and really taking care of people.
Do you keep in contact with him to this day?
Well, once in a while, I'll talk to him on the phone or I'll run into him someplace, and it's always a pleasure because I've been very fortunate in my life. I've never had a boss that I didn't really like, but Mac falls in the category of being above all the rest of them.
Alrighty, that takes about it. Thank you very much, Miss Governor.
You're welcome.
We're talking with Mr. Dennis Rosh, now working at Western High School. He used to work here at Basic High School, and we'd like to talk to him about our former principal, Mr. McDoniel. Mr. Rosh, what years were you a student at Basic?
Mike, I came into the 9th grade at Basic High School in 1955, and I graduated in 1959.
And what years did you work here for Basic High School?
I returned to Henderson to accept a position as a physical education teacher in 1964, and at that time I was one of the assistant football coaches and assistant baseball coaches. I worked at Basic High School through 1973, and the last position I held at the high school was that of Dean of Students.
What was Mr. McDoniel's job when you were going to school and when you were working here?
Mr. McDoniel was the assistant principal in the years that I was in high school. While I was, or in my last years at Basic High School, he was the principal here.
What kind of person is he to work with?
I felt that Mr. Mack was probably one of the most sincere individuals that I knew. He was very set in his opinions and his ideas. He had an established way of doing things, and he communicated to his people how he wanted things run, and we pretty well ran things the way he wanted them. He ran a tight ship as the principal.
Did you know each other personally as well as professionally at the school?
Yes, not when I was a student, but later on, after I had taught a number of years with Mr. McDoniel, I'd been to his house for a number of parties. I have gone fishing with Mr. McDoniel, and I would say that I do know him quite personally, and I find him a very remarkable man.
What kind of person does he strike you as being professionally and personally?
Mike, I would say Mr. McDoniel is one of the most honest individuals that I know. He's a very personable person. He's a very warm person when you get to know him personally. He is a lot of fun to be around.
Okay, that about wraps up all my questions. Is there anything else you'd like to add that I might have forgotten?
I would just like to say that I feel that Mr. McDoniel's retirement from Basic High School and education was a great loss for the city of Henderson. He was a fine man. He devoted his entire life to the school district and basic high school. There are very few people in this city who he has not come in contact with directly or indirectly, and he has affected the lives of many individuals in the community. He has gained the respect of almost everyone who has ever worked for him or was a student under him. And I think he did an outstanding job for basic high school and the city of Henderson. And I am very proud to have known the man and very proud to have worked with him.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr.
Okay.
Ross.
Thank you very much, Mike.
Here's a flashback to some of your past associates and schools. The original basic, the town site. Here we have you as a coach at town site. Here we have you as a woodshop teacher at the old basic high school. Here Coach McDoniels and Coach Taylor discuss strategy in the coming game. Here, Mr. McDoniels, you sit in your office. Now at the attendance desk. Wondering, was he ditching or was he serious? The construction of the basic high school on Van Wagenen. Both pictures show the skeleton of a school that was to be. Now your boss for many years, Mr. John Dooley, principal of Basic High School for many, many years. Now Mr. McDoniels enters the new office buildings at the Basic High School on Van Wagenen. This is an aerial photo of Basic High School. Now, someone whom you know, Mrs. McDoniels, in several classes and posing with several teachers. Again, we see Basic High School from the air. Now, an appropriate pair, Mr. and Mrs. McDoniels. The front office building of the Basic High School in all of its beauty. Now a corridor shot of Basic. Here Mr. McDoniels presents trophies at a California wrestling tournament. Here Mr. McDoniels with other colleagues of Clark County receive pins for service of 20 years or more. Mr. McDoniel has contributed 31 years of his life to Henderson Basic High School in the Clark County School District. Here, Mr. McDoniel, a longtime associate, Mr. Don Smith, discuss plans of some sort unknown to anyone. Now, the new high school. The newest of the new. The one that Mr. McDoniel left after only a year and a half. Now we have the front shot of the new basic high school. January 25th, 1974. Mr. McDoniel said goodbye to Basic High School. Basic High School said goodbye to Mr. McDoniel. Here Mr. McDoniel stands with his colleagues, Mr. Beatty, Mr. Frank, and Mr. Wooten. Here, Student Body President Ty Dalton presents a plaque to Mr. McDoniel for his service to Basic High School. Here, Jim Ness presents Mr. McDoniel with a fish finder. Fishing is one of Mr. McDoniel's very favorite sports. Now, Mrs. Robinson presents Mr. McDoniel with something else to aid him in his fishing, a winch for his boat. Now Mr. McDoniel makes a final speech to the student body and faculty of Basic High School. The assembly's over, students are leaving. Mr. McDoniel takes charge for the last time. Now, the students are up, standing, showing their respect to Mr. McDoniel. And again, the sunset over the new high school brings to the end Mr. McDoniel's career at Basic.
You were saying? Well, why don't you join me for dinner tonight? I don't understand things. Oh, a girl, of course. I'll tell you what. I'll be at the Royal Lounge about 10 o'clock. You know the place. Bring her by. I'd like to meet her. I drink you a coffee. Which translated literally means, do you think we could save the gentleman with the odd nose? The company's so delightful, I completely forgot to make a phone call.